The cursor blinks on a blank document, steady as a heartbeat. A half-eaten granola bar sits beside the keyboard, forgotten. The student clicks over to a video tab, then a game, then back to the document for 3 seconds. This moment is not about laziness, even though that is the first word that comes to mind. Earlier today, the same student solved a tricky math problem without hesitation. They assembled a shelf, practiced piano for an hour, and read a long comic about intergalactic trade routes. None of those tasks felt impossible, but the blank page did. Why does a straightforward assignment feel like standing at the edge of a cold ocean? The obvious answer is poor time management, but that does not fit. The student had a full afternoon set aside, and the desire to do well burned quietly all day. Yet every time they thought about starting, a tightness rose in their chest, and they found something else to do. Procrastination is not merely waiting. It is the voluntary delay of an important task despite expecting to feel worse later. It is different from planning a break or waiting for the right materials to arrive. Here, the person knows the cost and still cannot bridge the gap between intention and action. For years, the most common explanation was that procrastinators underestimated how long tasks take. That is true sometimes, but it does not explain why the student cleaned their room instead of writing. Cleaning a room takes effort too, yet it felt easier than opening a notebook. The key shift came when psychologists moved from asking what you are avoiding to what you are feeling when you think about the task. The answer, again and again, was not laziness at all, but emotional discomfort. The history paper was not just a paper. It was a signal of potential judgment, boredom, or self-doubt. The part of us that manages big feelings is not fully developed until early adulthood, making this especially hard for young people. When a task triggers anxiety, shame, or a fear of failure, the brain treats the threat as real and immediate. It does not matter that the threat is a stack of blank pages rather than a physical danger. The body stress response activates. A faster heartbeat, tense shoulders, a foggy mind. In that state, the urge to escape is powerful and nearly automatic. Opening a game or watching a video gives the brain exactly what it wants, which is relief. And relief feels good, so the behavior is reinforced. This is the hidden engine of procrastination. We avoid the task to feel better right now. The short-term emotional repair works so quickly that we do not notice it setting a trap. Because the bad feeling vanishes, the brain learns that staying away from the task is the solution. Now the student faces a double burden: the paper itself and the shame of having delayed. Guilt makes the task feel even heavier, which makes starting even harder. This cycle explains why procrastination tends to spiral rather than correct itself. Each round of avoidance strengthens the connection between the task and the feeling of threat. Research on this pattern consistently points to a single, uncomfortable truth. Procrastination is not a time management problem dressed up in a calendar. It is an emotion regulation problem. Emotion regulation is the ability to influence which emotions you have, when you have them, and how you express them. Think of it as a thermostat for feelings, not the temperature itself. When we procrastinate, we are using avoidance to turn down the heat fast. The strategy works wonderfully for the next 10 minutes and terribly for the next 10 days. Studies that track students across a semester find a clear pattern. Those who try to escape the discomfort early in the term end up with more stress, lower grades, and more visits to the health center. The temporary relief is real, but the long-term cost is also real. This is not about moral weakness or a broken personality. Procrastination is a coping strategy that many intelligent, capable people fall into when they lack other tools for facing difficult feelings. And the difficult feelings do not have to be powerful to work. Even mild boredom can trigger the escape hatch. What makes procrastination so sticky is the way it twists a story inside us. Every time the student avoids writing, they tell themselves a quiet story. I just need to feel ready. But readiness built on relief never comes, because the relief comes from not doing the task. The loop tightens. Believe you must feel motivated first, never feel motivated, delay again. Motivation, it turns out, often follows action rather than preceding it. This is one of the most surprising discoveries about human behavior. Starting changes how you feel about continuing. When you wait for the perfect internal state, you hand the task power over your mood. The history paper becomes the controller of your peace, and you become a hostage to a blank screen. Now consider another layer, the fear of imperfection. For many, the delay is not about sloppiness, but about a desire for flawless work that feels impossible to produce. A blank page is perfect, free of mistakes, so any sentence you add ruins that perfection. The delay protects the fantasy of a perfect paper that has not yet been tested. If the student never finishes, no one can say the work was less than brilliant. But this protection is expensive because the cost is the inevitable panic of the final hour. Here we see the cruelest trick of procrastination. It promises safety, but delivers suffering. The avoidance strategy that began to shield you from discomfort becomes the source of far greater distress. And then, after the late-night scramble, the student often manages to submit something. This rush can be a reward on its own, further cementing the pattern. The brain records, last-minute effort plus huge relief equals a strategy that works. It forgets the hours of dread, the lost sleep, and the lower quality that rushed work cannot escape. So the cycle repeats, semester after semester, paper after paper. But this is not a diary of doom. Understanding the mechanism changes the options. If procrastination is an attempt to manage uncomfortable feelings, then learning a different way to handle those feelings is key. The first step is noticing the moment of escape without judgment. Student feels the tightness, the impulse to switch tabs, and instead of obeying, they pause. They might say to themselves, "This is discomfort. Discomfort passes. I can be uncomfortable for 5 minutes." This is the turning point. The realization that the feeling is not a stop sign. The tightness in the chest is not proof that the task is too hard or that they are incapable. It is simply a body signal that can be separate from the choice to begin. When the student picks up the pen or types a single bad sentence, the spell weakens. The paper becomes a task rather than a threat, and the brain adjusts its danger estimate. One of the most effective interventions, tested in careful studies, is to shrink the commitment. Agree to work for only 5 minutes, or to write one terrible paragraph without editing. The goal is to lower the cost of starting until starting is easier than the dread of waiting. And the paradox is that starting, even badly, often builds momentum and reduces the urge to flee. The real reason procrastination feels so hard to stop is not that the person is weak. It is that avoidance works in the short term, and our brains are exquisitely sensitive to immediate rewards. We are wired to prioritize relief now over a later reward, a tendency called present bias. But present bias is not a permanent prison. It is a default setting that can be adjusted with practice. Self-compassion plays a larger role here than most people expect. When a student forgives themselves for the earlier delay, rather than piling on shame, the next attempt becomes lighter. Shame tightens the knot. A kind inner voice loosens it just enough to make movement possible. This is not about excusing the delay, but about not adding self-criticism to an already heavy load. Now return to the desk 40 minutes after we began. The student still sits before the blinking cursor, the granola wrapper now in the trash. The anxiety has not vanished, but it has shifted from a wall to a wave, approachable and temporary. They type a title, misspell a word, and keep going. The first sentence is clumsy, the second less so, and by the third, the paper is no longer an enemy. The tightness eases, not because the task is done, but because action rewrote the story. Procrastination is a strategy for the moment. The work of life asks for a different kind of courage. Courage is not the absence of the urge to run. It is staying put long enough to see that the blank page can be filled.